Well, good morning to everyone, and thanks a lot for the invitation and for creating this space for collective thinking. I hate text PowerPoints, but I prepare one, just in case you don't understand my English, okay? So, yeah, thanks. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I can do it myself. So my aim this morning is to share with you a collective view, a collective feminist view on the economy that we are trying to build together, feminists in the global south, particularly in Latin America, and feminists in the global north, particularly in the peripheries of Europe, of Spain and Portugal. We say that this is not an academic theory, but a struggle, a tool for struggle, that it helps us to direct our political actions and to build a diverse political subject, such as it helped us to build a women's resistance against trade agreements in late 90s and early 2000s, or more recently, it has helped us to build the women's strike in 2018 and 2019. We say that this is a knowledge mainly produced from outside the academia. As you can see, in our understanding of the social organization of care, which is very deeply informed by domestic workers' fight. So we share this view, and we also share a feel of urgency. We say that we are facing a multidimensional crisis, and a few decades ago, we were already talking about a crisis. When everything seemed to be okay in the global north, and the global south seemed to be obediently doing its homework to get to be equally okay, we were already talking about a social reproduction crisis in the global south, a care crisis in the global north, and a global ecological crisis. And we were able to name the crisis because we were talking from life and not from markets. And since then on, the crisis has gone deeper. And we say that we are now facing ecological collapse, and that in the global south, capitalism is showing its most violent phase through extractivism, through war, through narco-states, and that in the global north, we are facing a social reproduction crisis. So we say that we are living the end of the dream or the nightmare of development, and that we are in a situation of transition. And when we say transition, we are not talking about green digital transition such as the European Union does. We are saying that we are facing a systemic change, that the system is already changing from heteropatriarchal, colonialist, racist modernity to somewhere else, and that our responsibility is to impact on where and how does this transition go. So, and that today, to do so, and to defend life, today's life and future life, common shared life in this transition. And for doing so, we say that we need critical perspectives that depart from outside markets, that decenter markets, because we say that markets have colonized our socioeconomic structure, but also our subjectivities and our political aims. So, for example, we say that the question is not about creating more jobs, but about a redistribution of work, and moreover, about asking which work for which life. So, I will try to introduce you to this perspective by introducing three key concepts: sustaining life, capital life conflict, and care. And finally, I will give you a few points on what kind of future we envision. So the first one is sustaining life. This is our first key concept. So we say that the economy is not about markets. And the economy is neither about markets and something else. We say that we cannot fall in the dichotomous production-reproduction thinking. Why? On the one hand, because, and here we come together with ecological economics, because we say that production simply doesn't exist. Production is an anthropocentric fantasy, but we only extract and transform what is already in the planet. But money, as an artificial measure of value, helps us to believe in that fantasy that takes us to forget the limits of the planet. And on the other hand, reproduction. We do not want to understand the reproduction of the labor force to understand markets. We want to understand markets and many other things to understand the reproduction of life. So we try to decenter markets and start from other point. We say that our question on the economy is how do we maintain the conditions of possibility for a life worth living. And yes, we talk about life, and we know this is dangerous, that we risk to be taken as some kind of anti-choice group that denies sexual rights. But we do think that we have to dispute who is really talking about life. So how do we understand life? We say, first, that life is not a given. Life is a possibility. And for life to happen, we have to make it real. We say that life is a process, living is a process of dealing with our vulnerability. Second, we say that the only way for doing so is together with others. We are not dependent on others when we are a child or when we get sick. We are dependent on others every single day of our lives. We are interdependent. And finally, we say that the only way of living is in a living planet. So we are eco-dependent. So vulnerability, interdependence, and eco-dependence are the three basic conditions of life, and are the ones that are captured in the notion of defending the land, body, territory that our Latin American comrades are using nowadays. So, wait. I forgot to pass the And the second thing is that we are not talking about any life. We are talking about a life worth living. And this means that from the very beginning, we are questioning what is welfare. We are putting this political question on what is the life that we want to live together. And we say that to be a life worth living, it must respect two ethical criteria. The first one, universality. It is either accessible for everyone or it is not a life worth living. And second, singularity. It either respects diversity and does not homogenize it or penalizes it as inequality, or it is not good living. So this is how we understand life when we ask whether the economy puts lives at the center or not and creates its conditions of sustainability. And this gives us a huge political strength, because if talking about the economy is talking about financial markets, GDP, export, and so forth, most of us, we don't feel entitled to talk about the economy. But if we say that the economy is about sustaining life, every single woman feels allowed to talk about the economy. So this is a critical issue of our political strength. So when we look from the perspective of life, the first thing that we see is that life is not at the center of this economic system, that in fact, life is being attacked. And this is what we call the capital-life conflict. We say that there is a structural conflict between the processes of capital accumulation and the processes of sustaining life. And here we are using and redefining the capitalist labor conflict notion. But we redefine it by saying first that it is not a conflict with wage labor, but with all types of work. And second, moreover, it is a conflict with life in its deeper sense. And life cannot be reduced to the dimension of the labor force. And third, we say that the conflict is not only with human life, but also with the life of the planet. But saying capital life conflict is much more easier, is much more easier to say it than to understand it. Because what is behind those big notions, capital and life? First, capital is not an abstraction. Capital has a face. So when we say that we have a conflict with capital, what we are saying is that we have a conflict with the ways of living of the global minority that holds global corporate power, with their ways of living which are based on accumulation and dispossession. And when we say life, we know that behind the big word life, there are concrete lives who are receiving attacks very unequal depending on how they place in a hierarchical structure. So we say that behind life, there's a bulk of lives that are valuable as long as they are at the service of some other lives who are more valuable. And that the regime of existence is precarity, but that this also gives us some space, some room for exercising privilege. So we say that the farther away we are from that global minority, the more precarious are going to be our living conditions, the greater violence we are going to receive, the bigger amount of invisible work we are going to make, and the smaller the room for exercising that privilege. And then we say that there are other bulk of lives who are not valuable at all, whose only value is to be dead. For example, those who we let die or we assassinate in the sea to send the message of who has and who has not the right to move across the globe. So the notion of the capital-life conflict really refers to a conflict on the extremely unequal value of lives. And this value is set by other hierarchical axes: heteropatriarchy, colonialism, racism, capacitism, and so forth. And capitalism is a system that provides structure to make those unequal values material and real. So that's why the way in which we understand that conflict. And then we say, and this is structural and non-solvable. And this means that we are saying that the welfare state cannot get us rid of that conflict. So the welfare state can regulate its intensity, but cannot eliminate it. And this is why the welfare state is never going to be our horizon. We can use some of its mechanisms, but it's not our final aim, never. So if the conflict is, we cannot solve the conflict, which process is prioritized collectively? And of course, in capitalism, by definition, collective structure is set at the service of capital accumulation. And that's what we say that implies putting capitalist markets at the epicenter. Of course, in material terms, but also in symbolic terms, because capitalist markets define what we understand as welfare, as work, but even as life. When it's set a project of self-sufficiency that denies the ties that bring us together, and that denies this basic condition of existence of vulnerability, interdependence, and ecodependence. So capitalist markets have created a notion of life that is biocidal, that it's at odds with what life is. And finally, we say that they are the epicenter also in political terms, not only of the dominant policy, but also of our counter-hegemonic policies, politics, when we cannot imagine the end of capitalism, but yes, the end of the world. So this is the way in which we understand that conflict, and here we come to our third concept, care. We have arrived to the notion of care coming from others, such as domestic work, unpaid labor, reproductive labor, and it is a polysemous term. We don't usually use it to refer to a sector, such as the childcare sector or the elderly long-term sector. But sometimes we do use it in that way, for example, when calling for a strike in the care sector. But usually we use it in broader terms. And we use it for two things: for saying what we want to get rid of, what we could say care as the B side of the economy, and to refer to a horizon, what we want to put at the center, rebellious care, we could say. So, coming back to the capital-life conflict, saying that we put markets at the epicenter implies saying that there is no, and there cannot be, a collective responsibility on sustaining life, because the collective responsibility is put at the service of capital accumulation. Moreover, we say that life is being attacked. So how does life go on? How can we sustain life? And we say that life is sustained by putting this responsibility into the invisible, the hidden economic spheres, which we call care. So, and this type of care that sustains life under attack is done under three conditions. First, it is privatized, because capitalism is not just the history of privatizing the state, but also of destroying community and putting this responsibility into private households, private heteropatriarchal households with privately available means, either money to buy in private markets or time to do it for free in the private domestic. Second, we say that it is feminized, and not only because the lion's share of care is done by women, although in very unequal terms, but also because the building of hegemonic femininity is built to the duty of care. And we say that this is not a beautiful ethic of care, but a reactionary ethics of care. And we say it is reactionary because it's an ethics of sacrifice, Second, because you don't care for anyone or everyone, but for your nuclear radioactive family. And third, because doing it, you help to silence the conflict. And here comes the third condition, invisibility. And invisibility goes beyond being unpaid, because it can be paid but poorly paid. Invisibility is a multidimensional situation of lack of names, of data, of compensation, of rights, of collective regulation. But at the end of the day, it implies that from care, we do not recognize ourselves as subjects of rights, and we don't become political subjects. So invisibility refers to the lack of politicity. And this is not innocent. Care is rendered invisible to silence the conflict. So capitalism, so that's why we use the notion of an iceberg to describe the economy. We say that capitalism is a system that attacks lives, and that heteropatriarchal colonialist heteropatriarchy is a system that ensures the existence of subaltern economic spheres and subaltern subjects willing to inhabit those spheres in which life is sustained without protest. And that's how we see care as the B side. But this is a broad vision supplementary to understanding care as an horizon. And we say that care as a horizon, am I saying okay? Exists when we try to sustain life first by understanding its vulnerability, by trying to build interdependence in terms of reciprocity, by caring for human life and non-human life. When we sustain life in common and not in isolation, when we do not do that in a commodified way, when we do not impose it on others who have less power, they can be women or working class women or racialized women. So, and this type of rebellious care can exist in the peripheries of the global corporate power, or we can try to create it within the territories that are dominated by global corporate power. But it's going always to be in rebellion against the system. And it's going to put us a lot of questions on the type of the future feminist economy that we envision. So these are our three key concepts. And from here we ask, so what's our proposal? And I will go quite quick because I have to finish, but we've got 2.5 days to keep on discussing. We say that our political proposal must always be situated, that there are no universal recipes. And what's the proposal for our fortress called Europe? We say that the proposal for these territories could be labeled, and the key question is not the name, ecofeminist degrowth. And this refers to a double simultaneous movement that hits to the two parts of the iceberg. To the part the visible part, which is at the epicenter, we talk about degrowth, and what refers to the invisible part, this B side of the economy, we call it collectivization. So we talk about degrowth in four senses. First, we talk about metabolic degrowth with global social justice. And I'm not going to stop here because I don't have time, but if you want, we can discuss it. Second, we talk about reducing, degrowing the power of global corporate power. We talk about decommodification. We talk about withdrawing from capital what capital has accumulated. And it means money, but it means more than money. And we have to question money. It means time, it means land, it means data, it means knowledge, it means infrastructure, it means housing, it means seats, it means everything. So what we really say is that we have to reconvert private means of production of private benefit into common means of reproduction of common life. Third, we talk about degrowing our modes of living based on accumulation and dispossession. And this means that we have to question the notion of self-sufficiency, that we have to question white masculinity, and that we have to open a debate on what is a life worth living together, what we can call good co-living, buen convivir, we say it in Spanish. that respects those two ethical principles, universality and singularity. And 4, we talk about the growing, the scale, and the level of complexity of our socioeconomic circuits, and that we have to move towards relocalized and much more simpler economic circuits. So, our stance is, with the resources that we take away from capital, we will try to put them in a small scale, a more simple socioeconomic circuits in which we will assume a collective responsibility to sustain this political new notion of good co-living. And here, our stance is threefolded. First, we aim at feeding what we call the public communitarian. So we need, when talking about decommodification or defamiliation, we need to go beyond the state and talk about the community. And the community can help us to redefine and democratize the public. Second, we talk about what we could call economies otherwise. Economies that might be monetized or not, and that are led by a logic of common interest. And here we talk about social solidarity economies, about peasant economies, about popular economies. And third, we aim at feeding networked chosen families. Chosen families are the ones that are not based on inequality, that can combine freedom and commitment, and that are not isolated within their houses, but that create networks among them. And for doing so, the final thing that we say is that we need to move to a totally different economic logic. From the current logic of self-sufficiency and the ethics, reactionary ethics of care, we have to create a new, what we could call, ecological logical of care. And finally, this is an urgent thing because the system is changing and because we have to defend, I insist, today's life and future life, common life, from now on. Thanks.